everyone. My name is Jasmine Brown Jutras. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm your trainer today. I'm so excited to be here and to get started. Today, we are going to be talking about the state legislative process. And so this training will cover the processes of the legislature. We'll be talking about a bill from its idea through the committee, onto chambers, and to passing into law or not, and what that process looks like. And also, what do you need to know to be able to be a part of that advocacy process throughout the bill's life? And so I'm very excited to kick this off, but we're gonna go ahead and jump into it. Let's do it. A little bit about me, your presenter. So again, my name is Jasmine Brown Jutras. I am an organizer and advocacy trainer. I have a background in community and electoral organizing. Over the last year, I had the honor of working for the Biden-Harris presidential campaign, as well as the historic Senate runoffs in Georgia. And my passions are social justice. And I constantly am reminding myself that I truly love being in community, and not even having to remind myself, but just being there and being with community and doing that work reminds me why I enjoy activism and advocacy. And I know that I really wanted to share these tools with folks because when I began, it was really hard for me to find the tools that I needed to be most knowledgeable to be able to advocate effectively. And having the opportunity to take the tools that I've learned and put them into a training for folks to have accessible to them, to be able to be in an advocate space and to be able to do it in a way that you feel is effective. And so my passion stems from racial equity, immigration rights, and voter engagement. But I do strongly care about making sure folks have tools to advocate on whatever it is and whatever issue they need to. And so my saying is that I believe strongly that organizing comes from a collective power of knowledge and action together. And I hope that I can provide you with some knowledge to at least gain a base for how to be a part of the state legislative process and how to advocate effectively during that process. But if you ever have questions, my email is at the bottom. It is jbjorganizing@gmail.com. And I'm happy to receive any emails and answer any questions you may have. But let's do it, right? So what are the workshop goals today? One is to gain the knowledge of the legislative process from the beginning all the way to the end, and then to be able to identify the legislative leadership and their roles. I want to make sure that you know the people who are important and the people who hold the power. We're also going to learn some key terms that are used in the Capitol and the legislative process. And then lastly, I want you to take this time to learn to use this process in a way that it will benefit you when you're advocating. Let's do it. People to know. So, to affect change, we must know the people who are making the laws and who hold the power. So, on the right side of the screen, I have a list of the people who are in power in your legislature that have legislative power. Now, I didn't want to just name every important person or every leader in the legislative process. I wanted to make sure that I talk about the key folks who can move policies and who can move legislation. And that really should be your point of your target, right? So let's start it goes from the top to the bottom as far as ranking in power. So the first would be the governor of your state. So they're the executive chief of your state. Another person would be the lieutenant governor. They're second in command and are under the governor. So many times they're having small backroom conversations. And so if you can get the power of the lieutenant governor, there are a lot of times you can convince the governor. Next is the Secretary of State. They keep the records, and you're kind of like, why is that important? Well, they keep the records also of the governor, and that includes the laws that the governor signs into effect. So the Secretary of State is the last person who sees the law before it becomes a law, before it's filed. So they are very important. The President Pro Tem. So the President Pro Tem is the president of the Senate. So they reside over the Senate. They chair all the meetings and all of anytime the body is convened, they are chairing the Senate, and they also are over all of the leaders of the Senate and all of the senators. Next is the Speaker of the House. So I'm sure you learned in your government class that we have the Senate and we have the House. Well, there's leadership of both chambers. In the House, we have the Speaker of the House. They are the presiding officer of all the House of Representatives. And they have the similar powers of the President Pro Tem on the Senate side, where they are the top leaders of that chamber. And so moving on to the Majority Leader. So the Majority Leader, this is kind of exactly what it sounds like. They're the leader of the chamber partisan majority. So if your Senate has a majority Republican, then there is a leader over the Republican members of that chamber. So the Republican senators of that chamber. And oftentimes they get to decide what happens in that chamber. The majority leader holds a lot of power. I would argue that they have very close power to the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the House. And they're normally very close buddy-buddy. So keep that in mind. The minority leader is the leader of the partisan that is of the party that is in the minority. So, for example, if the Senate has a majority Republicans and they have a minority of Democrats, then there's a leader who is over the Democrats in that chamber, and they are basically the speaker, or they hold the responsibility of speaking for Democrats and speaking for the Democrats that are in that Senate chamber and what the Democrats want. In some places, the caucus chair, like the Democratic caucus chair, the Republican caucus chair, is the same person as the majority leader, but it doesn't have to be. Next important person is the committee chair. So the committee chair is the chair of legislative committees. And there are several legislative committees in the state legislature. And this is general for all state legislatures. There are many, many, many legislative committees. There are committees on education, on justice, on social justice, not social justice, I'm sorry, on education, on transportation, on infrastructure. There's all different types of committees and bills based on their topic, right? They're assigned to each committee, and there are chairs that head each committee. And those people are very, very important, because if a bill is put into a committee, that chair has a lot of power to decide whether or not it leaves committee and goes to the floor to be debated by all of the legislature, or if it never leaves at all. So that's a very important person. And then lastly, the floor leader. If a bill leaves the committee and it makes it to the floor, it goes to a file for the floor leader to read over, and they get to decide what bill will be heard on the legislative docket for that day. So they set the docket, they set the list of bills that will be heard each day. So they're a very important person to know, because if you have a representative that you know wrote a bill that you support, and it's already passed out of committee, you're just waiting for it to be heard on the legislative floor, that is the person you should talk to. You should be talking to the floor leader. Terms to know. So I have about 3 slides of terms. These are by no means all of the terms at all. There are plenty more, but these are some really important ones for you to know for the training that we're doing today, but also for you to know, just to have knowledge of as you're going forward in your advocacy at the Capitol. So let's go ahead and start with an amendment. An amendment is an alteration, made or proposed to be in a bill, or you can even amend a motion or a clause by adding, changing, or substituting, or even taking out portions of the measure. So you can amend a bill, you can amend a motion. Somebody can say, I move that we adjourn, and you can amend that motion. You can say, I move that we adjourn after the discussion of HB2, right? You can make an amendment. That has to be accepted by the person chairing and accepted by the person who made the motion or who made the bill. But at the end of the day, you can amend essentially anything in the legislative process. Next is the author. So the author is the legislator who introduces or sponsors a measure in either the House or the Senate. So the author is the person who wrote the bill. Next is a bill. So a bill is a proposed new law or a proposed change to a current law, and then it's presented to the legislature for consideration. So a bill doesn't have to pass. A bill is just something that has been drafted. A bill is considered a name, a title, a number, a title, and 2 sentences. That can be a bill. Or it could be 35 pages long. It could be anything as long as it is drafted by a legislator and filed. It becomes a bill. Next is bipartisan. This is an important term because it is used a lot in the legislature as folks have to work across the aisle to pass measures. A bipartisan is involving representatives of both political parties, or in some cases, multiple political parties. Many states have multiple political parties. For example, Oklahoma has the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, as well as the Libertarian Party. So bipartisan means just working with more than one political view. Next, committee, and I talked about this a little bit ago, but a group of members of the legislative body in which is assigned to a special task. So, for example, legislative committees are assigned to the task of reviewing legislation based on whatever topic it belongs to. Next would be debate. So debate is a group of members of the legislative body to which is, is a group of members of the legislative body. I see there's a typo here, but it is the time for discussion on a topic. So debate doesn't have to mean line up on either side of the room and you get 3 minutes and you get 3 minutes. Debate just means discussion. It means that there's a topic at hand and folks are having an opportunity to share their reasoning why they support it or why they do not support it. Debate is also the time when like amendments can be submitted or the bill could be changing and motions are being made. But this is just a time for discussion. Next, we have an emergency clause. This is important because an emergency clause is a provision. This requires a 2/3 in the state of Oklahoma. In other states, it may be different. But it allows for a measure to become effective immediately upon the signature of the governor or on a specific date. So when a law or when a bill is made, at the end, and we'll be dissecting a bill in just a minute, but at the end of the bill, you can choose, normally it is 90 days after, it is normally like November 1st or 90 days after the law has been passed, but emergency clause can say 3 days after the passage or immediately upon the signature of the governor. It can be anything that the bill says when it goes into effect, as long as it is passed that way. As long as when the bill is passed, it's passed with that emergency clause on it. So you have to pay very close attention to that so that you know when laws are going into effect after they've been passed. Next, we have the floor agenda. So we talked about the floor leader. The floor leader sets the floor agenda, or also known as the docket. It's a list of legislative measures by number and short title, which we'll get more into that in a second, and that the majority floor leader or the floor leader plans to consider on a particular legislative day. So they're just setting the agenda for the day, and the agenda is a list of bills that will be heard. Next is lobbying. So lobbying is a form of advocacy. It's to voluntary or for a fee. There are paid lobbyists, but you can also do it for yourself. But it is a voluntary or for a fee to represent yourself or any individual, organization, or corporation or entity before the legislature. So you can lobby on behalf of whatever it is that you want to lobby on behalf of. Maybe it's a law, maybe it's a social issue, maybe it's for an organization, maybe it's just for yourself, right? And now next is going to be a reading. So this isn't just, open up a book and reading. It's a little different. So it is a presentation of a bill or a resolution. So anytime a bill is presented before a body or before a group of legislators, that is considered a reading. And so every measure before it's passed in the state of Oklahoma, and again, make sure that you are looking into what your processes are. But for the majority, every measure has to receive 3 readings before it can be passed. And none of them can be on the same day. And the 4th reading only occurs at the time of the final action, so at the time of the final vote. Now, to table something means to lay it aside for future conversation. And it's usually like the point is to postpone it because maybe there's not time, or maybe it's just not something that the body is ready to talk about at the time. But normally it's just to postpone. But there is an option to table indefinitely, which means that the matter can never be brought up again. And then lastly, we have a veto. So a veto is the disapproval by the governor of a measure. So the governor has the power to overturn the decision of a legislature by vetoing a measure. A measure is often, if the governor signs the veto or does not sign it and vetoes the measure, then it goes back to the legislature because of his objections, and they can choose to review it, or they can just let that law die. So let's dissect this bill a little bit. So in front of us, I have an example of HB 1775 in Oklahoma. This was a law that passed out of our state that essentially says you cannot teach race and gender in the classroom. Very problematic, I know, but it is a very hot topic, and I thought this is the perfect bill to show. So this is, I believe, the first writing of the bill. As I said, there are processes and the bill will change, but this is the first one, so it's in a very simple form. But I've circled a couple things, a couple places on this bill, and we're going to name a couple of them together. So at the very top, it says first session of the 58th legislature. This is the session that the bill was written. So there's our first session and there's the second session. This one was written in February, I believe, of 2021. And that was the 58th legislative session that has been held by Oklahoma's legislature, just so you have an idea of where that number comes from. Now, where it says by, this is the author, and they will only use the last name. So you should make sure to know your representatives or your senators by their last name. Don't make it a practice to learn their first name because you'll be confused. And then to the left of the author is the House bill number. So whenever you hear folks on the news or just in conversation, somebody may say SB 2 or SB 8 or HB 1775. That is just an abbreviation of SB means Senate bill or HB means House bill. And so just pay attention to that, and that's how you can remember. This is how folks communicate with each other about what law they're speaking about before it's become a law. Sometimes after it's passed, people will still refer it as HB 1775. And so just that is important for you to know what the name of the bill is. The next thing I have circled here is the little numbers on the side of the page. These are important because during the process of discussion or debate on the bill, you may hear legislators come on the mic and say, on line 16, I would like to strike the Riley Boatwright Act and add Riley's rule. So if you are watching the legislative session, maybe on Zoom, or maybe you're in person in the gallery, you could have a copy of this bill pulled up on your phone, and you can look, you would use these line numbers to see where the legislators are talking about making edits to this bill. Next, we have the short title. So this is a summary of what exactly this bill is talking about. It's not exactly very short for this one. Some of them are a sentence, some of them are a paragraph, but it is in short of what this bill is talking about and what it does. Next, we have the introduction of a new section. So the This document is broken up into sections and subsections. You will see section 1, section 2, section 3. Those are an introduction of a new section. And we'll talk about what a subsection looks like in just a minute. But we're going to go down to line 19. This is the example I just gave a minute ago. This is a strike. So a strike is just to simply take something out of a bill entirely. Next, we are going to talk about what does an insert look like. So you can strike something from the text, but you can also insert something from the text. You can always tell when something is being inserted into the text when it is underlined. So for example, here we have 2021 through 2022 is underlined. So earlier, I explained that there would be a subsection. So a subsection looks like this right here. So this subsection will be normally a capital letter. So you'll see the section 1, and then it'll indent over and it'll say like A, blah, blah, B, blah, blah. Those are subsections. You can even have subsections. And so it could, under the E, it might drop down to a lowercase I, and so on and so on. So just paying attention to those, because that means a new section is being added. And then under that new section being added, it is going into detail what is being added to that new section. So keep that in mind. Those are really important things to look at. Next is that effective date. Remember, we talked about an emergency clause. This is where you will find when a law will go into effect. For this law, the bill that was originally written said that it would go into effect on November 1st, when in fact, after everything was said and done and all the processes, the bill went through all the processes, it actually ended up having an emergency clause, and had an effective date of July, so that it went into effect before school started. So that's why it's really, really important to pay attention to the process of your bill and where it is in that process. And then lastly, at the bottom here, we have the page number. Again, just really important to know if you're listening to a legislative session, or if you're in the gallery, so you can pay attention to what is happening and what is being said, and what they're discussing in the bill and where. So now we've talked about terms, we've talked about people you should know, we've dissected the bill. Now let's talk about the process. So the legislative process is complex. It has a lot of steps. So I want you just to kind of bear with me for a moment. If you need to pause to rethink something or take a look, because there's going to be a lot of text in the next couple slides, please do so. Take your time through this section. It's going to be a little bit long, but it is really, really important and relevant information. So I told you this before, we were going to talk about it all the way from the conception of an idea to the passage of a law or not passing. So from the beginning, introducing the idea. You as a person, did you know that you as a person can introduce a law? If you have an idea for a law or a bill that you want to see put into effect in your state, you can go and you can tell your legislator or a legislator, it doesn't have to be yours, it could be a different legislator, about this law, and they may pick it up and they may write a bill and run it through the legislative process. But the ideas come from constituents, special interest groups, agencies, and more, but they have to be introduced to a legislator to be able to be drafted. So when you introduce your idea, it's with the hope that they would be willing to author the bill, of course. So when you have an idea and you want to introduce it, make sure you're talking to the person that you want to author that bill. So if it's your legislative, it's your legislator, great. But that might not be the best person sometimes. Maybe your legislator doesn't support the issue that you want to write a law about, right? Maybe you do your research. It's best to go ahead and do your research and you go find a legislator that does support that and would run that bill for you. And it's okay to do that. But the legislator can choose to pick up an idea or not. Now, just a little tip. Most legislators do have topics that pique their interest or that they're known for writing policies about. So do your research and pick your author wisely. So research and drafting. So we have the first and the second readings. So this is what we're gonna talk about on this slide, the first and the second readings. Now remember, a reading is any time a bill is presented to a body or to a person. So the first step is that, let's, for instance, say that you went and you proposed a new idea to a legislator and they said, yes, I'm going to take it and I'm going to write this bill for you and we're going to get this passed. So, but what is the first step? The first step is drafting. The author has to request the bill to be researched and drafted by the staff at the Capitol. Now, many people think that the legislator doesn't themselves. They can, but there are folks who do that for them, really. They just bring the idea and let the staff know that this is what they want to run. Once a bill is drafted, the bill is filed and then assigned a bill number. So a bill does not have to be drafted completely. It does not have to be a full 35-page document or a full fleshed out idea. It does not have to be in its complete form when it's submitted to be drafted or to be filed. You just simply have to have a title. You have to have your short title. So like your idea of what the bill is, the short description of what that bill is. And know what category it falls under. So remember those committees we were talking about, whether it's education or justice or criminal justice or whatever it may be. You just have to have an idea of what area it belongs in and create that short title and submit it. And then have like a small, maybe sentence or two. Some people take the time to fill out, if it's something that a legislator is really passionate about. A lot of times a legislator may submit 20 pieces of legislation before the legislative session gets here, but maybe 3 of them are actually like written out, fully researched. And then the rest of them are what's called a skeleton bill. And so it's just a one-liner, but they know they have an idea and a constituent brought it to them. And so they wanted to make sure that that actually got in there, and they'll take the time later to flesh out the details because they do have deadlines of when these bills have to be filed. Then after the bill is drafted and it's filed and it's given a bill number, then that means the bill has had its first and its second reading. And now it's time to go to the speaker who assigns it to a committee. So in this instance, we are talking about the process as if it were in the House. So the House, the member, the representative has written their law. It's been through a first and second reading, and now it's going on to the speaker, because in the House, the speaker gets to assign which committee it goes to. They divvy out all of the laws that have been written and they give them out to all these many committees to review. So on to committee. Once it gets to committee, this is a very important part that I think is not highlighted enough. When people think of legislative session, they just imagine legislators on the floor debating on a mic, really heated conversations, there for late nights, and eventually a bill is passed or it's not. What people don't pay attention to is what happens before it gets there. And that is the committee consideration. This is a very crucial point of a bill because a bill will either live or die from this moment. It's a little dramatic, I know, but it's true. So a bill is considered by a committee in which it's assigned to. Depends on what topic this law is about. Let's say it's about education. So this education committee is reviewing this law. It's a committee, it could be a committee of anywhere between 5 to like 20 people. And they're all sitting in a conference room and they're reviewing legislation. They are looking at grammatical errors, but they are also looking at relevancy. They are looking at just honestly, like sometimes just opinions. Do we support this? Is this something that we want to that we even want to allow to go to the floor for folks to discuss? And then there's also times where they might go ahead and push it through just because they want to spark that conversation or they want to spark that opportunity for the body to decide on their own, which is what they should do. Allow for the body to make that decision because they are a representative of all of their constituents. So a couple of things will happen. So I've got a red light and a green light here. So green light, great. The bill has read it, and the bill was reported as a do not pass. My lights are backwards. As a do not pass, this is bad, right? So a do not pass is bad. This means that it does not make it out of committee. That should be a red light. But the red light means that the bill dies on site. So it cannot leave the committee and it's not allowed to be heard on the floor. It has to be reintroduced in the next legislative session. So unfortunately, that legislator probably has had a bad day and they have to go back to the drawing board or talk to that constituent or that special interest group to let them know, hey, it never passed out of committee. Another option, which should be a green light, is that the bill is reported as a do pass or a do pass as recommended. So this means that it can be considered on the general floor of either the Senate or the House, depending on which chamber it belongs to, okay? So a do pass just means it passes as it was given to the committee. A do pass as amended means that the committee as a body looked at this legislation and they made a couple amendments to it. Normally clerical errors are not considered do pass as amended because it's just fixing clerical marks. However, if it is a change to the wording or a change to the meeting, it is definitely going to be recommended as a do pass as amended. So if your bill gets a do pass or a do pass as amended from the committee, then it's handed off to the floor leader who can schedule the bill to be heard on the floor agenda at any time. And that's amazing. That's exciting because you've passed that hurdle. You've made it over that bridge and you are in the clear. The only thing left to do is to make sure the floor leader knows that you want to hear this bill. You want this bill to be heard on the floor. Now, this committee, I want to take a pause because the committees are an amazing opportunity to really affect change through advocacy because you have the opportunity to talk with that committee chair, talk with the committee vice chair, have a conversation, learn who's on that committee list of who has your bill in that, let's say, education committee. Let's see who has access to looking at the bill and who has a vote on what happens. Those 20 people are the people that you should be talking to advocate to pass your bill out of committee. It's a lot easier to convince 20 people than to convince a body of 101 in the House or a body of 50 in the Senate. So this is an amazing opportunity for you to really dig in and advocate before it gets to the floor, because it's much easier in committee than it is to an entire legislature. So use that knowledge and see what you can come up with and see how you can make sure that your bill is heard and that it makes it out of committee. So to the floor, which is the third reading. So the floor leader has, let's say, decided to schedule the bill for the floor for consideration. This is awesome. You did your due advocacy, you talked to the committee, you got out of the committee, you did your next step of advocacy and you called the floor leader, you sent the emails, you called your friends and said, hey, email the floor leader, tell them that we need to hear this. You did your part and the floor leader said, yep, okay, let's go ahead, let's hear it, let's see what you got. Now, you, of course, as the constituent, do not get to present this bill. The author gets to do that for you and gets to do that and advocate to the body. Presenting a bill is a form of advocacy to present this bill to the body. So what does it mean for floor consideration? A bill is being presented. That's what it means. So first, the author explains the bill. What does it mean? Why did they write it? Why was it so important to the constituent? Really, connecting that story so that the body understands why this bill was written. And then it moves on to possibly being amended. So just because it passed out of committee doesn't mean that your bill will still stay in the same form that you presented the idea. So it's very important to pay attention to the process and pay attention to the language that is being changed in your bill, because you have to pay attention to know if something has been added that changes the intent of the bill, in which case that's not great at all. But sometimes there are amendments that are added that make the bill stronger, that make it better. And so you just have to pay very close attention to the process and where it is in the process. The floor consideration also includes time for debate. Remember, in the terms we talk about, debate doesn't just mean a banter between, one side or the other. It is open discussion. The floor is open for discussion for legislators to speak for or against this law that's being presented. They can offer a motion. They can say, I move to amend this law by striking, line 5 and inserting this. Anything at this time, discussion is open, and the goal is to make the bill the best it can possibly be before it's put to a vote. And the last thing to happen is for the bill to be voted upon. So voting, let's talk about that for a minute. Every legislator gets one vote individually. So let's say there is a majority yes vote. That means that the bill passes, okay? If there is a majority no vote, then that means the bill does not pass. And what I mean by majority, I mean 50% of the body plus 1. So if it is in the House of Representatives, that means it's 50% of the House of Representatives plus 1 vote. Same thing for the Senate, same thing in joint session when it's the House and the Senate together. That is what it takes for a piece of legislation to pass. So let's say, amazing, the bill has passed the House. Your legislator did amazing work, you did amazing advocacy, and the bill is ready to leave the House. And it's been passed. Now it goes to the Senate chamber. Remember, we talked about this. The House has to see the bill, the Senate has to see the bill, and then it goes off to the governor. So we're now on to the next process. The floor leader of the Senate will be given the bill as it's been passed. So it may have been amended in the House, which it probably will be. So as amended, this bill has been brought to the floor leader in the Senate, who then has the opportunity to put the bill up for consideration. Then comes more advocacy. You need to let that floor leader know this bill needs to be heard. We want to hear this. And then the bill undergoes the same consideration process as the House. So it goes through the reading of the bill, the debate, and then on to the voting. And again, can be amended in the Senate as well. We'll talk about what happens next if it's amended. It gets a little sticky. But for instance, let's say that the Senate now has gone through the process and they've voted yes. That means by majority, 50% plus 1, that means the bill passes and the bill goes on to the governor. Amazing, fantastic, we love to see it. But let's say that there's a majority no vote. That means the bill does not pass. It does not see a further action, and it cannot be brought up again until the next legislative session. But let's talk for a minute about this. So it has to return to the original chamber. So if a bill passes through the Senate, it must return to the chamber in which it came from. So in this case, the House. And the House has to either accept or deny the bill that has come from the Senate. This is in the instance that it's been amended. So if a bill passes through the Senate, but they've changed a couple things, it still has to go back to the House for them to say, yeah, we're cool with that, or no, like that's not for me. We're gonna have to redeliberate this. And it goes back and forth until a decision is decided on what happens with this bill and what the final bill should look like. So let's talk about those amendments, okay? So new amendments. So let's say the Senate may amend the legislation before sending it back to the chamber. Let's talk about if it's being sent with amendments or if it's being sent without amendments. I want to take a look at my little tree here to explain. It looks a little complicated, but I'm going to walk you through it, okay? So let's stick to the left side of the screen for a moment. So what happens if the Senate decides to amend legislation before sending it back to the House? So with amendments on this bill that's leaving the Senate, one or two things can happen. One is that the House approves of the Senate amendments and it has its final and fourth reading and they vote one more time and it's sent to the governor. Great. Now the governor gets to sign on to this law or not. But let's say the House refuses the changes and now they have to request a conference with the Senate. They have to say, request that conference and say, that's not something we support. Why did you change this? What is your reasoning? And then they come to a discussion. So, but there are a couple things that happen. So they're supposed to request a conference with the Senate. That's what's supposed to happen next if they don't agree. If the conference committee report is not filed, so if the committee report or request has not been filed, the bill stops, nothing happens. That just means somebody dropped the ball, they didn't do their job. Another option is that the conference committee report or request has been filed, but they still weren't able to come up with an agreement. Again, the bill dies then and it cannot continue. Now, let's say they go into a conference committee and it's filed and then they're able to come to some kind of conclusion. That means it goes up for floor consideration again after they've come to a decision or an agreement on what this bill should look like. And then we have two options. It can either the House does not adopt it because this conference committee is not the entire body discussing what happens to this bill. It's just a select few. So it goes to the House and they're like, okay, we didn't agree to these changes, and they vote no. Then the bill does not move forward. However, if it goes up for consideration, they've deliberated, they found a solution, all of the House members agree with it, they go ahead and have that final reading and they go ahead and pass it. And then what happens next is that it's transmitted to the Senate for approval, for one last final approval to the Senate, and then the Senate approves it and they send it on to the governor. And the governor has a whole list of responsibilities. And then what happens if there are no amendments? If there are no amendments, it's just sent straight to the governor. At the end of the day, the goal is to get this piece of legislation to the governor, if we can, for the governor to make a decision on. So what are the governor's responsibilities once it gets to their desk? So they have a couple options. The first being that they can sign the bill into law. They can sign it at any time during the time that they, from the time that it gets to them. They can get it 5 minutes after it's passed and sign it into law. They can sign it in 3 days later. However, there is a way that the bill can become a law without a signature. So this is when the governor does not sign within 5 days after it's been given to them. If they do not sign within 5 days, after it's given to them, it becomes a law. That's how it is in the state of Oklahoma. Other states have different rules and have different ways of going about that. But so you should look into that, what your state does. But in Oklahoma, that's how that works for us. There is also the option of vetoing the bill. The governor can say, yeah, no, I don't support this. I refuse to make this a law in my state. And they can just stop the bill from happening, the law from happening. And then lastly, we have a pocket veto. So a pocket veto in the state of Oklahoma, and again, make sure you're looking in your state to see if this is the same. But in the state of Oklahoma, pocket veto looks like this. So 15 days after the legislative session has ended. So for example, the bill we looked at earlier was the first session of the 58th legislature in 2021. So if the body adjourns, all business is done, and the legislative session has ended, the governor has 15 days after that to sign a bill into law. If they don't do that before the 15-day mark, then that is called a pocket veto and the bill does not go into effect. So some of these are a little bit different on a state-by-state case, so make sure you take a look at that. Now, again, reminding you to look for that emergency clause. So in the state of Oklahoma, the emergency clause allows a law to become effective immediately upon the signature of a governor or at a specified date. But the law cannot become effective fewer than 90 days after session adjournment without an emergency clause. So if anybody wants to pass a law that goes into effect any sooner than 90 days, you would have to put an emergency clause on it, and the governor has to sign on to the bill and the emergency clause for that to go into effect on that specific date or immediately upon the signature. So what are the next steps? So if the bill is signed or if the bill goes into law without signature, it goes straight to the Secretary of State. However, if they veto the bill, that is a red light and nothing happens. Except nothing happens technically unless the chambers or the legislators decide to seek further action. That is the only time that something would happen. So for the veto and the pocket veto, there's a way to do a veto override. In the state of Oklahoma, that looks like a 2/3 vote from each chamber. So the Senate has to give a 2/3 vote of each member, and then the House has to also give a 2/3 vote. And then unless it's passed with an emergency clause, keep that in mind that it would require a 3/4 vote. So it's a lot harder than getting that 50% plus one to override that veto. And it would take a lot of work. So it doesn't happen very often, but there are avenues so that the body can, so that the legislators can control what happens to the legislation and not just be kind of told what to do by the governor. There are avenues that things can be done, but it's always much harder. And then also there's the opportunity to just not do anything and the legislature chooses to not override the veto, in which case the law doesn't go into effect and it has a full hold. So let's say your law has been signed and it's been sent off to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State has a couple of things that will happen. So one, it becomes law on the day it's specified because the Secretary of State will file that law. However, if there is no date specified in the bill and it contains an emergency clause, the bill will go effective immediately upon the governor's signature. So if there's no date on there, but it does have a clause, an emergency clause, as soon as the governor signs it, it's become a law. If there's no date on it at all, and there's no emergency clause after it's been sent to the Secretary of State, then the bill becomes law 90 days after sine die adjournment, which sine die adjournment just means the closing of that legislative session. And they will not return until the next legislative session. So 90 days after session has ended, it would go into effect. Ooh, that was a process, right? I told y'all it was a lot. So like I said, take time to pause and go through whatever you need to check out that process. And again, every state process may look a little bit different. Every state constitution looks a little different. Every rules and bylaws in your legislature looks a little different. So familiarize yourself with what your state's processes are. But overall, that's a really good idea of the general process of a bill. So how do we prepare ourselves? Let's get ready. How are we going to enter this advocacy room? How are we going to enter the legislative session, and how are we going to be a part of this process? There are some facts you have to know before approaching the legislative advocacy and the legislative process. You need to know your state process, the bill, and the legislature. And I'm going to break down all three of these as our last section to give you an idea of what you need to know of each of these three topics. So we're going to start with knowing your state legislature. Every state has their own legislature, and every state has their own rules and bylaws of which they govern, which governs their legislative process. So in this training, you've gained an overview of the legislative process, but it's important to know that every state varies. So you need to, go ahead and go to your state legislature website. Every legislature has one. find yours and look for the official process of each legislature, or the ones that you want to know about and the ones that in the state that you belong. Next, you're going to go ahead and look at the leadership. So in the beginning, we talked about all those leaders who are really important to know. You need to go down that list and find out who's the governor, who's the lieutenant governor, who's the secretary of state, and find their email and their phone number so that you have access to contact them and advocate to them whenever you need to. And then also look to find out in this leadership, it's good to know what legislation and what policies interest them, what piques their interest, so that way you can know if your policy idea that you're trying to present is movable. Can they be that vehicle to make sure that this policy is seen through? Because you don't want to talk to somebody who really doesn't care about student loan forgiveness, right? You want to talk to somebody who cares about student loan forgiveness, and they're going to put the effort in to make sure that it goes forward. Next, we have knowing your political landscape. So what is the political landscape of your legislature specifically? What is the party makeup of the legislature? Is there a majority of Republicans or Democrats? Are the leaders of each chamber, are they moderate? Are they easy to talk to? Or are they really hardcore left, hardcore right, not willing to hear either side of the story? And then get familiar with the party leadership. Get to know that majority and minority leader. Even make friends with them, have regular conversations so that when the time comes and you need to have that conversation, you need to move that legislation or advocate for somebody else's idea, you have that contact already. Next, know your bill. If there's a bill that you feel strongly about, you absolutely need to take the time to read. Don't be that person. Don't be the person that reads the short title and doesn't know the bill. Be the person that reads the bill and do the research so you can be able to form a fully educated opinion, okay? The best advocate is the kind of person who has done their research. So know your bill number in the title, okay? When in a conversation, folks reference the bills by their bill number. They don't say, oh yeah, that one bill about this. Sometimes they do. But when you're talking to a legislator and they say, well, what bill you're talking about? I don't know what that is. You need to be able to reference, I'm talking about HB 1775. And they can be like, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But the only way to know this is by knowing your bill number and the title so that you can communicate that to the legislator. Know your facts of the bill. Don't just go based on what folks have told you. Don't go based on what you learned on the news or reading on Facebook or reading on Twitter, Instagram, whatever it was, TikTok. Know your facts. Before you share your opinion, do your research. Look up things like, how does this bill affect people, actually? Why are people for it and against it? You need to know both sides, whether you're for it or against it, and why. Have other states passed laws like this? That's really important to know because legislators really like to put forward bills that have been passed in other states and have had outcomes. So you need to know what that outcome is. How did it affect that other state? Was it a positive outcome? Was it a negative outcome? And then lastly, follow the process. Bills are living documents. They are changing every day that they're in the legislature until they're passed or not passed. They're constantly moving from chambers to committees to authors and through everybody's hands. And so it's important that you know where the bill is in the process and how it's changed. Lastly, know your legislator. Knowing your legislator is more than just like knowing their name and what district they serve. Representative Smith serves House District 51. It's so much more than that. You have to dig deeper to be able to effectively advocate, because the more you know about the person, the more you know how to communicate with them, and the better chance you have of convincing them of your idea or convincing them of your opinion. So get to know them as a person, research their background. What did they do for a living before this? What was their status in their community? Did people know them? Who supported them? Even down to who donated to their campaign, who put those yard signs out, who called voters, Next, know the district. learn about the district that they serve, all the way from the demographics of the district are very, very important. Is this a heavily majority minority district? You know, what are the businesses? You know, I live in Oklahoma City, and so in my district, I have the state fairground. In some other districts, you may have an NBA arena in your district, and that's really important. If you want to write a bill about sports, right, having to do with sports, you're going to want to go to the person who has an arena in their district, right? Because it's important to them. That is something that directly affects their district. So, and knowing the inside of your district is really important. Knowing the key stakeholders in the community, because if you can make friends with those key stakeholders, you can use those key stakeholders as pressure on that legislator to do what you need them to do what they should do. And then even the size of the district, is it a small voting population? Is it a large voting population? Are people even registered to vote? Are people paying attention to what this legislator is doing? These are all resources that you can use to effectively advocate and to really get through to that legislator. And then lastly, get that inside information, get some tea. You know, how close was their race? Did they almost lose by a couple points? Did they barely win by a couple points? You know, do they have an opponent already that could be better than them, or maybe they're worse? Do they listen to the constituents? Because honey, we know that some people don't listen to the constituents, and so we need to hold them accountable. And you know, who are their mentors and their friends? They listen to their mentors. There are people that they work with in the Capitol that they listen to. At the end of the day, they may not listen to you because they don't know you. It's not okay, but it is possible. So you need to find out who are the people that they listen to so that you can influence them. These are all very helpful things, and knowing how to get to your legislator and how to really get them to understand where you're coming from and get them to do whatever action it is that you need from them. So remembering all three of these points, knowing the bill, knowing the legislator, and knowing your state processes is very important to be able to be a part of this process. And with that, I have nothing else for you all. I hope you all enjoyed this training. I know it was a lot of information. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at, again, jbjorganizing@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. But without anything else, thank you all so much for being here, and you all have a good one.